So I'll read a couple quotes of the author of Hamnet. We'll get into the historical stuff in a minute with Megan. So in an interview about the book, she said she was always baffled and saddened by how little mention Hamnet receives in biographies and literary criticism. She wrote the novel to attempt to give him a voice and a presence. She herself almost lost a child to meningitis at age 4, and she also suffered from encephalitis when she was 8, and left her with an understanding of serious effects of veteran illness. So the book describes fighting the childhood illnesses and the psychological impact of sickness and death. And then later on in an interview about the film, she says this, quote, "I think originally I conceived the book to be about fathers and sons, as the play Hamlet is. But what happened is that while I was researching the book, and I was reading all these big sort of 1,000-page biographies of Shakespeare, I got sidetracked by how badly Anne, or Agnes, was treated by history and scholarship and academia. I've always been told one narrative about her, which is that she was a peasant, she trapped him into marriage, he hated her, he ran away to London to get away from her. And that's all the way from scholars to other writers of fiction and screenplays. I became really incensed by this because there's no evidence whatsoever for any of that at all. And actually, I think there's a lot of evidence that he did love her. So I wanted to ask readers to forget everything they think they know about Anne and the marriage. A play was also produced of the book in just a little bit before the movie in November 2022 and premiered in 2023. I think it's currently just started to tour the U.S. It's going to be in Chicago, D.C., and San Francisco. So that's interesting. It's a book, a play, and a movie almost, well, within a 5-year time period. So, the biggest thing with this, so just from a filmmaker's perspective, what I want to talk about first. So if you noticed, the camera is many times the camera was very still, with just a familiar setting behind them, and the characters move around in that setting. What does that remind you of?
Stage.
A stage, a play. William Shakespeare, all the world's stage. She's playing Chloe, sorry, I should talk about the director. Chloe Zhao was thinking about all these things. Shakespeare's main philosophy, all the world's a stage. Let's depict it. So there was the kitchen with the table and the fireplace. That happened repeatedly. The bedroom of the twins. There was no beds, there was 2 beds, there was 1 bed, there was no beds. And there was a couple other sets, basically, in which the characters entered, we watched them. Another big thing she did was, if you notice, we're kind of familiar with it these days, you might not have noticed, she called them CCTV shots. They kind of look like security cameras. Outside when they were saying bye, bye, bye. And, yep. And that was a way to kind of subconsciously modernize the story. Because we are used to CCTV now, security shots. And by doing a period piece, using that kind of shot, it's kind of bringing us into, security is everywhere we're watching. At the same time, she was playing around with the idea that the camera is an omniscient being, entity. We are an omniscient being, entity. Always watching, always there, always present. That omniscient being or deity could also, we want to say, oh, it's God. This movie is actually death. Death is always there, always watching. If you notice, there were a few shots that were kind of weird. The camera was still, the character walked in, the camera moved faster than the character, and then the character. So that was signifying time moves on. We enter, we exit. It's not always perfect. The biggest example is they did it twice, and it was almost the same time shot. When we first see the twins, and they're dressing each other up, they move off frame, then the camera's still, they move off frame, and then it kind of slowly takes the time to head back over, and then they kind of go on with their lives. Later, when Judith is sick in bed, Hamnet comes up, the camera's still, Judith, what's wrong? The camera does the same exact movement, but Hamnet stays over there, and you just hear it. So it's just that life goes on. A lot of shots of trees, that was signifying time passing. She didn't want to do like a montage. It was, oh, here's snow, oh, here's leaves falling. Just the nature aspect. And if you remember, so a lot of trees pass, and then maybe it was Christmas and they're giving gifts, and there's some trees. She's pregnant again, there's some trees. But then when it moved into the third act, the shots of the trees were the tapestry of the play, just sort of bringing the two worlds together a little bit. The last thing that really jumped out, and I just want to quickly get to our guests, so I want to, but we can go back to think of questions. If you were here for Barbie 2 years ago, remember we talked, Dan Kunkelman and I talked about there was one scene that pretty much summarized the entire film. It was when Barbie talked to that little old lady, and they kind of talked about existence, and so it was sort of the film in a nutshell. It's always good to look out for those. There were two in this film. I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab at it, but the first was actually, there were no words in it. It was like the third time we saw the kitchen scene in the hearth. She was making hard-boiled eggs. He was about to leave. She was really mad at him after Hamnet has died. She's emotional. She's angry. She starts hitting him. He just embraces her and hugs her, not to fight, but to contain her, to calm her, to be a strong, sturdy presence for her. And then she succumbed to it, calmed down. They started sort of breathing together on the floor, and then he walked away. That, in a nutshell, is kind of the relationship of those two characters. The other scene happened right away in the beginning. Whenever a movie talks about another kind of story, what was the story he told in the beginning?
Oh, Orpheus.
So who's familiar with that myth? John, do you want to try to summarize it for us? Orpheus and Eurydice?
I can't summarize it more than...
More, well, yeah, he did that well, right? Can't compete with Shakespeare. So, from them, he was an artist, fell in love with a woman, death took her to Hades. He followed her in, made a deal that she can follow him out as long as he doesn't turn around and look for her. At some point, he couldn't hear her anymore. Turned around, she was there, it was just quiet, and she got taken back. If you know the story, interestingly, his grief, he goes on to live his life, but his grief sort of develops his deeper understanding of what love is, and he continues to write poetry and music that changes the world in this mythology. Eventually he is killed, but his legacy lives on, teaching the world what true love and loss is, and he is finally reunited with his wife in the land of the dead. So one of the motifs was, look at me, right? She said at the wedding day, she said it again during the play. she said, follow me as well, before we cut that scene. So there was that motif of look at me, it's okay to look at me. Obviously Shakespeare's, we're talking about someone who has a great legacy, 400 or 500 years, a man who has taught us all about love and grief. What's his one statement? Better to have loved and lost than never have loved at all. A lot of his plays deal with that. I said I would talk about the scene we cut. So that was a CCTV shot. The camera did not move. They went into like a shed. They did what you know they did. The reason it was awkward was because it was a CCTV shot. It felt very voyeuristic. It felt very realistic. It did not feel like, oh, this is Top Gun Maverick, where we smooch and then we fall off frame and then we wake up with a little disheveled hair. It was very like 60 seconds, this has happened, and it's just like, okay, that was awkward. So even though it was PG-13 and nothing graphic was really shown, it felt more graphic than it needed to. But it went with the theme of the camera work of this film. So Chloe Zhao is very into realism, letting her actors change the scripts. A lot of improvisation. We usually think of improv for comedy. Jesse Buckley's primal scream, when Hamnet, I wasn't in the script. They just were going and she just felt and she did it. The director was a little concerned it was too much, but she's like, that was real, that was what she was feeling. She was told some people have got up and left at that moment just because of how real it was, and just they couldn't sit through it anymore. So you usually hear that about like graphic movies or, oh, I can't take this anymore. So just the intense emotion of that. The hawk thing actually came out of improvisation, so that became sort of a symbol throughout the movie of the spiritual aspect of her with the nature. So Megan, we were talking, obviously, the play Hamlet. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, obviously it's one of the most famous English writings ever. So we're probably all familiar with it somewhat. And before you go, because you'll be someone who understands Shakespeare a little bit more, Chloe Zhao is a Chinese woman who lives in America. I don't even think she's Chinese American. She came over here to study. So English is her second language, so she claims, I don't understand Shakespeare at all. And the first time she understood what the ghost was saying was watching Paul Mescal do it. And then she realized, still don't know what you're saying, but I understand what you're saying. And that whole third act, I think we all understood it, but I'm not sure if we can intellectually, like, what's the one-to-one here, or if there even is one. So, yeah. Sorry.
There we go. All right, hi everyone. My name is Megan Miller. I'm married to Ben Miller, and I'm the daughter-in-law of Esther and Dave, who you most likely know. I definitely recognize some faces here. My husband and I have been coming to Calvary for over a year, but we're those people that everybody makes fun of because we hide up in the choir loft. But we have been steadily coming, and we love being part of this community. And I was really honored that Pete asked me to be a part of this tonight. Part of why I was asked to be involved in the conversation is because I'm the person who runs the company that is doing Shrek. So I have a background in theater. in musical theater and in plays, and in Shakespeare plays. So I've studied it my whole life. I've loved it forever. I found a love of Shakespeare through my father, who's an English teacher. And actually a lot of what I've been talking about tonight, it's been thoroughly vetted through him. He teaches Shakespeare to high schoolers and has for almost 2 decades. So Pete asked about finding a Shakespeare expert. He is my Shakespeare expert. So I'm hoping to do him justice with my notes today. But I have performed in Shakespeare, and I've also directed Shakespeare several times. And after watching this movie, I'm really itching to direct Hamlet again. So if anybody wants to come see it at my theater company, please just give me the extra push. Also, I think it's really funny, and I thought it was just fun that all of the young people's hands shot up when Pete asked if they knew the Orpheus and Eurydice story. I think there's some theater nerds. Anybody here like the musical Hadestown? Oh, yeah, okay, how could I tell? Oh. So I've got a lot of theater lovers and a lot of cinema lovers and a lot of lovers of God in this room, so I'm really happy to be here tonight. So Pete posed 2 questions to me when we were talking about this conversation and this presentation. At the time I hadn't seen Hamnet, but my dad and my brothers had gone together, and they are very stoic men, and they all said that they were weeping together. So I knew that it was definitely one for the books, and I had to watch it sooner rather than later. So Pete just gave me the extra oomph to really dive into the behind the scenes and all of the meat behind it. But Pete asked me to contemplate and ponder 2 different questions. One of which being the relation between Hamnet, the movie, and Hamnet, Shakespeare's real-life son, and the correlation that it has and potentially could share with Hamlet, the Shakespeare play. And so I did a real deep dive, and I fell down a couple different rabbit holes online and realized that there's a pretty big debate through all of humanity for centuries on whether or not people believe that William Shakespeare's true life inspired his works. And I have a lot of feelings about it, and I'm really curious. I was excited to have that question be brought up today, because I'm really curious who differs in this room, because I can see the argument from both sides. One side of the argument, I'll tell you right now, I think that it would be nearly impossible for his works to not be influenced by his life, but I can understand the opposite side. The opposite side being that there are many people that speculate that Shakespeare did, I think a lot of us know, Shakespeare didn't write all of his plays necessarily, or he didn't come up with all the stories organically necessarily. That's just fact. There are people who suspect that maybe there was a ghostwriter. I don't like to fall into all that. I love the works, and I love the text. So the rest of the conversation doesn't interest me personally too much. But people who know that fact, a lot of people then take that, they run with it, and they say, well, no, Shakespeare pulled from Greek mythology. Shakespeare didn't come up with this story on his own. It's not inspired. If anything, it's inspired by his father's passing. And yeah, okay, yes, that's probably true. It is true, in fact. We know that Hamlet, the play Hamlet by William Shakespeare, was in the works before his son passed. We know that he was actively working on this manuscript, and it was inspired by 2 already existing stories, one of which was Un Hamlet, almost the exact same name. The other story was a Nordic tale from, I think, centuries before he was even alive, and it was about a Danish prince seeking revenge. And if that sounds familiar, it's because that's the plot of Hamlet. So I thought it was funny.
Also, 2022 David Eggers film called The Northman that came out. That's trying to say this is the real Hamlet.
That's what I haven't. Is an Eggers film, is it? Okay, I know what I'm watching tomorrow. But I thought it was funny when Pete said that who called this movie fan fiction, like Shakespearean fan fiction?
The director.
The director did, yeah. Because it kind of feels like, sometimes I think about Shakespeare, it feels like Shakespeare is just writing fan fiction because he's taking inspiration from other stories, but it doesn't really make it any less his works. They're his stories that he's created, even though he's taken inspiration from other people. And along that same line of thinking, how could you not, especially as if you think about what an artistic, philosophical person he was, which we don't know by interviews, but we know because we have his text. we have his written word, so we can kind of piece together who William Shakespeare was. And it's all going to be a little bit speculation, a lot of it speculation. But I personally, I think, I don't have children yet. I have friends who have children. I have siblings that I've watched grow up. I've got a 10-year age difference between my little sisters, so I definitely feel like Mom 2.0. But still, I don't have my own children, but I have seen parents lose their children. I have seen and experienced grief from the sidelines. And I've seen the ways that it can impact entire communities. And I just can't imagine that not having some kind of reflection in Shakespeare's work. And one of the other arguments that people will bring up often is that back in their day, it's mentioned briefly in the film when Agnes's mother dies. She dies in childbirth. I think it's presumed that the baby dies as well, right? I don't know if that, yeah, that's at least how I took it. So people speculate and say, well, I mean, child loss was so much more common back then. It was treated differently. People reacted to it differently. They were more steadfast against it. They could handle it better almost. And I definitely think that there's merit to that. I was talking about this pretty extensively with my dad, who's a very, very he's a faithful Catholic, but he's a Christian through and through. And yes, the child loss was treated differently back then, but I tend to think that there is still, I mean, we are made in the image and likeness of God. We're different from animals. We are different from the circle of life, the Lion King message of it all.
That's Hamlet.
Which is Hamlet, right? Thank you, that's a great point. I have a hard time believing that, I remember thinking about this question of, okay, well, did people react differently to child death back then? Did they not care as much? And I thought about the Blessed Mother walking alongside Christ as he bore the cross. And we know that she mourned with him, that she grieved for her son that she bore from her body. And she was alive before Shakespeare. So I can't imagine that we would have fallen away from our true humanity so far that we'd be like, poo-poo, my child has died. Oh, okay, I'll move on. I do think there's a difference also in infant loss, which was very common, and the loss of mothers in childbirth. But also, Hamnet was 11 years old. And so that's, Pete talked a little bit about what we know to be true about Shakespeare. This is a lot of speculation in the movie, but there are facts that we know to be true. We know that Hamnet died in 1596, which is 4 years before Hamlet was published officially on the stage. And unfortunately, this got me when I found out this fact. The script plays around with the true fact of life a bit, and I didn't realize this until after I'd seen the movie. But it's devastating, the scene where we find out that Shakespeare, he doesn't know that Hamnet has passed, and he rushes home. He's away from home, and he rushes in, and he sees the body of his son, and it's a devastating scene. And the real life story, which we do know is fact, is so much worse. Because he didn't even get to see his son's body. He didn't even get to go to the funeral. By the time Shakespeare returned home, his 11-year-old son had passed away and been buried. And I just can't imagine raising a child for 11 years that it wouldn't have an impact on your life. And I wrote this note for myself as I was watching it through this time. But at the end of the movie, I think the movie kind of answers this question in itself. If you remember the scene where Hamnet has passed and they're talking to each other, Agnes and Will, and they're saying, where is he? I look for him everywhere. I don't know where he is. And this just like blew my mind this time watching it. There at the very end, Agnes and Will, they've reconnected. She's finally understood his process of grief. And they both see young Hamnet, little 11-year-old Hamnet. He's looking back at them. He makes eye contact. Will sees him. It's a beautiful way to end the movie. And I was like, oh my gosh, they see him. They see him. They've answered their question of where is he? Where is Hamnet? Where is my son? He's everywhere. Hamnet is everywhere. He will be in everything they do and everything they see. And so that's my answer to the question of, does Shakespeare's actual life
have any reflection on his works and vice versa. I think there's no way an artist isn't going to have some element of their own human experience reflected in their work, even if they're taking inspiration from other stories. So that's my big answer for the first question that Pete posed to me. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts that they want to share before I move into the second question. I think I'm crazy. Yes.
You know a lot more about Shakespeare than I do, let me tell you.
Maybe.
But in the New York Times, they are in the habit every now and then of publishing a poem with a detailed description of the poem, and these are extremely interesting. And they had one several months ago, a poem by an American poet by the name of Elizabeth Bishop. And the poem was entitled, "The Art of Losing Isn't Hard to Master." And Mr. Scott, who wrote the thing, follows her through all the different revisions that she made. It had started off very deeply personal. There had been a loss or a rupture of a friendship, or the friend had perhaps let her down in some way, or whatever it was. Very personal. And as she refined it and refined it, it got less and less personal and more and better as a poem. I was very struck by that. I had no idea, because I was familiar with the poem from way back when, but I didn't realize that personal history. And I think you're totally on the money when you say, of course, these things would shape his mind. Of course they would. But all these different things coming together in the mind of someone like Shakespeare with this phenomenal gift of language, we can't pull out the individual threads, or it would be very hard to do that. And yet we're sure they're there because he was a human being. And that's the way all of us are. We are what has happened to us, in a manner of speaking. So I thought your observations there were very interesting.
Thank you. I'm fascinated in the New York Times that I've got to look this up, because that sounds incredible. But thank you for saying that. And you're right. I didn't even mention, but you just reminded me. There has to be threads, and people see threads of his grief in other works. So some people argue, well, no. Obviously, some of his other, I think it was King John. I think it's King.
I think you're right about
that was
the
written
dead
right
child.
after. Yes. So King John is a play by Shakespeare as well. It was written closer to the death of Hamnet. And there's a quote. I can actually have it here. I'm happy to read it. So people use this quote and they say, well, no, Hamlet's not about Hamnet, because other works have more of a calling towards him grieving a child, such as this quote from King John. "Grief fills the room up of my absent child, lies in his bed, walks up and down with me, puts on his pretty look, repeats his words, remembers me of his gracious parts, stuffed out his vacant garments with his form." So that's heavy, and it's obviously about child loss. And people can say, yes, I mean, it was so much closer to Hamlet's passing. But exactly like you said, it just feels like as humans, there's going to be threads. I mean, I just think about how I grieve as a human being. There are threads of my grief all throughout my life, in the moments of joy, in the moments of sorrow. It's always there. Grief is a journey. So thank you for saying that and for reminding me of that other poem.
So before we move on to the second thing, you reminded me talking about that this film, the director talked about the need to normalize death, and she studied being a death doula as opposed to the birth one, and she learned, and this is before she did Hamnet, that it was more common for bodies to die in your household, and they just hung out for like a week. People used to prop them up and take pictures, like their final picture. But that was more what people did, and they weren't scared of the body, or it actually helped them get used to it. So the scene where Judith is like, "That's not him, that's not him," we all know what that's like. We go see a viewing and we're like, "That's some weirdness." But spending time with the body for a week, it apparently helped people with their grief. It normalized it. But what changed everything was actually the plague. Bodies had to get out quick because they were so infected. So bodies would die, people would be now scared of dead bodies, they had to get them out, they had to pile them in carts and get them away. And ever since that plague, we're still today scared of dead bodies, more or less. We don't like death, we don't like talking about it. Now from our Christian viewpoint, we try to put a more positive spin on death with the truth of what it is. But our culture in general, so Agnes was very concerned about not being prevented to see the body, like her mean stepmother or whoever it was didn't let her see, so that's why she let Judith see. And if you remember that shot of Judith looking at Hamnet, saying that's not him, the camera was low, and you saw the foundation of the roof, and it looked like a rib cage, like a skeleton. It was just death, was just in that room, present, and they were all facing it head on. So we'll do this one. Oh, it probably won't do it justice, but we'll try to do it a little quicker. The other big question I had, because I want to bring up our other guest, was this film. Who was it? Kevin told me, hey, I saw Hamnet the other day. And I was like, okay. And he's like, there wasn't God in it. I think you're right. So the question I had viewing it was, interesting to make a movie about someone and pretty much remove God from it, but Shakespeare was a real person. Do we know anything about his faith? There is spirituality in his plays. Would he or would he not want God removed from this story, basically, I guess? So what was Shakespeare's faith?
So this is,
Hello, I'm back. So this is the question that I'm pulling very heavily from my dad's notes. I wish he was here because he's so eloquent and so passionate about Shakespeare. I just loved sitting and watching him. But I had a really wonderful, it was a very nice excuse for me to sit down and talk to my dad about Shakespeare for 2 hours last weekend, so thanks again for having me. But basically the question being, do we know, was Shakespeare a Christian? The answer is no. It's the same question, it's the same answer to the question before. We don't know. We only have what we can speculate, but really, from what we have of his text, it is very hard to assume that he wasn't Christian. His plays are Christian. Almost all of his plays, King Lear being one of, I think, the only exception, are based in Christianity. And so either he was a Christian or he had a very, very good understanding of Christian theology. And I realized that tonight as I was watching the movie again, what I did to answer this question, my dad and I, with the bulk of our conversation was about, we dissected his works, because that's all that we can do. We can look at the text that Shakespeare has as his legacy. And the 3 plays that I took notes on are the 3 plays that were alluded to in the movie. So we see in the beginning, he's writing a poem about Agnes, and Pete said the timelines are all out of whack of when he wrote these plays. It's just for cinematic storytelling. But the first play in the movie that he alludes to he is Romeo and Juliet. He's writing this poem, this love poem for Agnes, and it becomes eventually a poem about Juliet and Romeo and Juliet. And then the scene with his children when they surprise Agnes and, oh, what's this little play they've written? That's Macbeth. His great tragedy, Hamlet is the great tragedy, but one of the more violent of the Shakespeares, which I've also directed and is one of my very favorites. And then, most obviously, at the end, Hamlet, which is the 3rd one that I've chosen to talk about, because why wouldn't we tonight? But these are his 3, I think, most well-known. Just maybe by show of hands, or do most people know the rough stories of Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth and Hamlet, the rough plot lines from high school English class? We can remember bits and pieces maybe. Yes, so I'm going to start with Macbeth. And this is the one, Macbeth is the most focused in demonology, you might say, which I learned a fascinating fact. King James, who was the king at the time, he was fascinated and obsessed with the occult. He actually wrote a book, I believe it's called like Introduction to Demonology or something, written by King James. So Shakespeare's plays were largely, he was asked to write a lot of them. A lot of them were inspiration. Seamless transition. So a lot of his plays were commissioned. That's the word I'm looking for. And I'm not exactly sure which all were commissioned, but I have to have some. Sometimes people ask, well, I mean, Macbeth, there's the witches, there's the focus on demons and demonology. I do think it's an interesting fact that King James was very fascinated in that topic, but that alone also points to a Christian theme, because the question of Macbeth is are we able to choose good over evil? And I think it's interesting, you compare it to a story like Oedipus, because Shakespeare was very inspired by Greek mythology, and Oedipus is basically the greatest pagan drama, and Shakespeare took a lot of influence from that. But Oedipus, the meaning and the plot and the story behind Oedipus is that Oedipus tries, he learns what his fate is going to be. It's the fate given to him by the gods. And he learns, oh my gosh, I have a horrible fate. I will do everything I can to avoid coming to this end. And it's inevitable. The fate that he's trying so hard to run away from, it happens in the end, and he succumbs because the message is, oh, the gods are in control, the gods. And that story, the story of Oedipus, is the exact opposite of what Macbeth is getting at. Macbeth is totally contrasting it. It is a Christian drama. Macbeth, he's tempted by the devils. I think it's interesting, the play starts out where Macbeth is crowned the Thane of Cawdor because he is seen as righteous. And the Thane of Cawdor, before him, he was caught being treasonous and he's executed. And so Macbeth is given the title Thane of Cawdor for being such a righteous man, and then the irony is that he falls into the same pitfalls and succumbs to evil. He's face to face with the witches, with the devil, with the question of, can I be good, can I be bad? It's a question of free will. So I think that there's just so many obvious themes of Christianity in Macbeth. I don't want to go on for too long, but what I also think is so interesting and a great argument towards him being a Christian, or at least understanding it so thoroughly, is the text. There's Christian text in all of Shakespeare's dialogue. So in Macbeth, he's talking about God. He's talking about Christianity. First of all, the people who come in at the end to save the day, the good guys who slay Macbeth, who are they? Does anybody remember what they're called? They're the greatest soldiers in Christendom. I mean, come on, it's right there in the text. Yes. And Macbeth never counters. There's never any doubt that God exists. And that's especially prevalent in Macbeth's monologue, where he is talking about jumping the life to come. If anybody remembers this, Macbeth has been teetering back and forth between his good side and his bad side. And where will he fall? And he, instead of falling down on his knees and repenting, which, by the way, the original Thane of Cawdor did do. In the beginning of the play, the original Thane is caught. He falls on his knees. He repents before God. Macbeth has the opportunity. He basically has the same thing happen to him. He's caught. He realizes the witches have deceived him, and he doesn't fall to his knees. He laments on his woes, and he says that he's going to go out to the bitter end fighting. He's destroyed himself through his own free will. And so when he says, we will jump the life to come, what he's saying is, I'm going to take all of the, prioritizing my life here on earth. I know that there's God. I will jump that life with God in heaven. I don't care about that life with God in heaven. All I care about are my earthly possessions. I want to be king. I want power. I want greed, wealth, etc. And what he's saying there is, who cares what comes next? I throw away God and my life in eternal bliss with him. So Macbeth is not countering the idea of God in Christianity. There's so many other themes of that in Macbeth, but I just think this is one of the better examples of there's Christianity on every single page of Macbeth. And the same can be said for Romeo and Juliet and for Hamlet as well. Romeo and Juliet is very, it's factually a Catholic play. There's the friar, there's they go to confession, there's the sacraments. I think that at one point they say that before Romeo and Juliet are married, they have to, I forget what it's called, but basically it's an old way of saying they have to go to confession before they are married. And the opposite of Macbeth, where we're talking about like the pagan influence and how Macbeth is so Christian, Romeo and Juliet's just kind of spinning that on its head. It starts very Christian. It starts with these two kids who are very faithful, very good. They're good and righteous people. And as they fall further and further away from true love, because, get me on a soapbox, the true villains of that story are the parents. As they fall further and further away from true love, they fall into paganism. We see Romeo in the beginning. He's actually, again, with the text. He is saying things that are so based in Christianity. He's talking about Juliet. He calls her a saint. He's talking about your face is a holy shrine in the beginning when they're falling in love, and it's beautiful. So Christian the language is. And then as they fall further and further away and into despair, he gets more paganistic. I don't know if that's a word. He falls into paganism. He says at one point, I am fortune's fool. I think that's after Mercutio is killed. He says, I am fortune's fool, which goes back to the Oedipus story. Oh, the idea of fate. There's fate. I'm fortune's fool. There's nothing I could do to change my fate, the opposite of free will. And the tragedy ends in them falling further and further away and ending in death and despair. I also think it's very interesting that the story of Romeo and Juliet very much matches the story of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. I didn't realize this. I don't think I knew this story, but it is exactly the same as Romeo and Juliet. They die by suicide, or one hears that they've passed and they come back, they kill themselves, the other hasn't died, they kill themselves. It's Romeo and Juliet. And Cleopatra and Mark Antony are very, very much a pagan influence. So we see these two righteous people falling into despair, and I think the message being that without Christian guidance, rooted in true love, in God, and in faith, we will fall back into despair. And that's my Romeo and Juliet. And then just to end with Hamlet, I think the same. There is so much, it feels like on every page there is Christianity. I think one of my favorite moments in this movie is when Will is standing and he's contemplating suicide, and that is the whole premise behind to be or not to be. That is the question, to die or to live. And I can't remember if they have the whole monologue in the movie, but one of the lines that's written in the text is, "Oh, that the Almighty had not fixed his cannon against his slaughter." That's in the to be or not to be message. And what does that mean? Which also, I love the quote from the director, oh, it's hard to understand Shakespeare. It was hard for people to understand Shakespeare back then too, but it's in how the delivery is coming across. And I really felt it when I saw Paul Mescal do it. He's saying there, God has forbidden suicide, so I cannot kill myself. Do I kill myself or do I suffer and stay alive? Oh, God said I can't. I mean, it's just, when you break it down like this, when you kind of translate it back into our language, you can see Christianity everywhere in every page of almost every piece of Shakespeare. So I personally would be so shocked to find out that he wasn't Christian of some kind. But he definitely understands Christian theology in a beautiful way.
Thank you. three people who are passionate about three topics to talk. It did remind, as I call up our next guest, Dr. Phil Monroe, while you were talking, reminded me of the to be and not to be thing. A fun fact, probably the coolest fact about the film, is little Hamnet, his real name is Jacoby Jupe. They cast the gentleman to play the actor who's playing Hamlet. His name is Noah Jupe. He's his older brother. So the resemblance is there. It wasn't just, hey, they kind of look alike. And so that connection sort of seeped into the film. It was almost tangible, even without knowing it. So that leads me, the segue here. It's interesting that in film, so Shakespeare has his own worldview, right? Then he did a good job of saying he was at least knowledgeable of Christianity. I mean, of the times, pretty much everyone was, but he didn't write about it negatively. So his worldview is one of God is present, God is here, questions of suicide, questions of tragedy. This film's worldview, from the book author as well as the director, they're more naturalistic, they're more humanistic, I guess. Individually get through grief. So my big ask of Dr. Monroe here is counterpoint to the film with our worldview. Talk a little bit about grief and what this film depicted, what was good about it, what was true about it, if they missed the mark anywhere, if they left, should there have been a whole fourth act of actual truth. So.
Yeah, thanks. And I think the movie does a fantastic job of illustrating what grief looks like. It's diverse, it's wide-ranging, it's angry, it's shocked, it's full of tears, it's avoidance. You see people who just say, don't let the child see the dead body. It's blaming, right? So there's often a journey that goes through shock and anger and denial and blaming. That's not him, it doesn't look like him. You weren't there. That scene was so powerful. You weren't there. What she's saying is you can't know what it was like because you weren't there. She feels that attachment rip. Like, you weren't there with me. You can't say you know anything. Notice how that makes us all in a pool of our own tears. Even though I know your tears and you know mine, it's really hard for me to get into yours and for you. So there's that fragmentation. You see how the family fractures apart. They don't spend a lot of time with Judith, but she must have some survivor's guilt and some things like that as she's going on. So I think they do a fantastic job of expressing that. Now the scene near the end where, well, first off, everybody is grieving alone. There really is no coming together. There's only a few moments of it, except for the scene when all the hands go forward. Right? Isn't that a moving scene? They all go forward. And the reason why for Anya this seems to be so healing and so part of her grief, she looks around. These people are crying. She's smiling actually at this point because she maybe feels seen. She's seen her son or a representation of him, but it is together. Everybody is grieving together. And this is what I think we have is such a beautiful thing, is in the scriptures we have lament psalms. And lament psalms are grieving together. They're supposed to be. We don't do a very good job of it, frankly, except at funerals and Good Friday. But outside of that, we don't really say these grief psalms very often together. I'll give you one little story here about some people who were out on Staten Island. They'd come from Liberia, escaped the Civil War, but even though they had escaped, they were here in another country, kind of fractured away from their culture. And somebody got the bright idea to hold plays. And let's tell the play of what happened in Liberia. And they actually put on a play, and the participants were all Liberians, who were audience, rated the play. Like, my story was a little bit different. My story was like that. And out of that, they saw a whole lot more healing of that grief. So, do you grieve alone? The answer is we kind of do, because it's hard for anybody to get into our story. But when we share it together, right, we are able to see that other people are grieving as well, and somehow it lessens it and reconnects us back to each other.
So as you were talking, another thing popped in my head. So this, a film is made by artists. It's about a play of artists. Do you remember the first time in this movie that William actually broke down and cried? Anybody? So he performed as the ghost, wiped his face, sat down in this little rickety room surrounded by costumes and props, and he was in his element where he felt the most safe, and then he wept. But it was after he was able to express himself through his art. Chloe Zhao, in her commentary, she basically said, "This is us," as in, this is every director, this is every screenwriter, this is every costume designer, this is the film art community. We don't know how to grieve, so we make a movie about it. And then we can exhale, type of thing. So the whole tragic artist thing, I guess, is legit. But not everyone. So interestingly, as much as they could relate to that, they did want to have a counter to a more natural of Agnes. And if there's any spirituality in the film, she was the most spiritual, even though it was more of a new agey naturalistic thing. She relied on potions and chemicals and stuff. Yeah, so I didn't have a question that went through my head. But,
It's really common that, why is it that we cry more at a movie? Maybe you cried more at this movie than about the things going on in your own life. Because sometimes you need something that can express that emotion and connect it. So that's maybe what William needed. First, some ways making the play was a way to push off the grief that would have felt consuming. But now that I've been able to express it, then I'm now allowed and able to experience it.
and at the same time, he finally felt seen. So Agnes didn't feel seen, he didn't, but then she's saying, "Look at me," but he's also saying that, but just not,
Right.
he's being more stoic, but then he realized she finally saw me, and that I am grieving in my own way.
Her grief was so visceral. Universal theme of mother's reading, and at the point when she screams, the point that is silent, is second, that was silent. And I guess really more power of a man conveys, men like keeping inside a lot. But he celebrated his grief into art. That's all how I saw it.
Yes. Everybody grieves differently, but there is generally a trajectory of some sort of numb shock that moves into hopeless anger sometimes, or defensive numbness, like that. And hopefully then there's a place where they find ways to express it and name it. So obviously for Will, he had to put it out there in the tangible world with an actor who looked like his son.
And then his wife realized how he was going through the grieving process, and you could see the knowing look in her face.
Right, she feels less detached from him because she realizes, oh, he too has grieved. Yes. Sam, you had a question?
I was just going to read a brief thing from the Gospel Coalition. More than any other Shakespearean play, Hamlet has the status of a cultural icon. C.S. Lewis wrote that we have here something of inestimable importance. The friendly Shakespeare claims that Hamlet has been performed more than any other play in the world and is the most serious, most written about work of literature. Pretty words.
Yeah, this film was part of, it was trying to like humanize an icon. You know, Shakespeare is Shakespeare. You don't really think about him as a human. You know, you learn about him in middle school, you learn about him some more in high school. You choose to study him more in college if you want. You're either interested or you're not, but, you know, 500 years is a long time ago. And it's hard, it's an interesting exercise to try to humanize the icon. Yeah, I mean, I did a quick scan of talking about performances, and since I'm just doing film, this doesn't count, you know, how many times it was performed, but since film was invented, between 1907 and 1921, there were 8 silent films from France, Italy, the UK, Denmark, and Germany. Then when sound was introduced, there's been 23 feature-length films or TV productions, and some of the TV productions were recording a performance and then showing it. The first feature-length film with sound was actually made in India. It was called Kun Ka Kun. And then, of course, Laurence Olivier in 1948. The first U.S. production was in 58, and it was a performance of a play, and they just aired it as a Hallmark Hall of Fame special. Then we remember in 1990, Mel Gibson was Hamlet in Zeffirelli's film. Brown did his version in 96. And the last movie, it's called Hamlet from Hollywood, was in 2000, and it was set in modern day. Ethan Hawke played Hamlet. But inspirations of it, you know, Tom Stoppard, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, that took the idea of let's tell the play from a different perspective. And other people did that with Ophelia, and other people did that. So they took characters, like I mentioned, Lion King is basically Hamlet. And to your point, Shakespeare was like Disney. He took legends, made them modern stories. And that's what Disney's made their money on over the years. And then I mentioned The Northman, that was the most recent one. The story of Amleth, which was a Nordic Viking. They claim that that's where that story came from. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
Recently, there's been 3 new scholarly works that have entered into the academic world. They're all about how religion has returned to the secular academic world through the writings of Shakespeare. And the idea being that, well, we can't talk about religion, but we can talk about Shakespeare. And it turns out that the religious aspects of Shakespeare has gained new traction in the academic world. And there were just 3 new books that just was written and reviewed that I've myself read, but it's in a major review periodical.
Just to go off of that, I forgot, my dad actually spoke to me about that same point. He told me that he read online a version of Macbeth that had been edited for a public school, and he didn't realize why it seemed so different and kind of bland and flavorless at first. And then he realized this public school had taken out all of the Christian themes in the story of Macbeth, and it essentially turned it just into a revenge play. And it lost all heart. And my dad didn't know that when he read it, but he just knew instinctually something is missing. So that's a great point. Christianity is coming back into our society through the works and inspirations of history.
Sounds like a film called Hamnet.
Pete, I was curious, they kept zooming in on what I would call the cave.
I was expecting something demonic or something to happen.
Yeah, so that was definitely a motif. With the opening was her in like a fetal position in the roots, and there was that hole next to her. That was our introduction to her. The legend of that she was born, like her mom came out of, like, what they call her, a force witch or whatever. So the symbolism, where the film kind of got like artistic when Hamnet died, and then he was behind a tapestry and was calling for mom, and so that's where they brought that whole idea. And he was basically in limbo because the mother wouldn't let him go. Because she said to Judith, I will never let you go. And then she said the same thing to him. So symbolically, it's not literally that they're saying we believe in purgatory or limbo, but it was symbolic that in her grief, she was, the phrase let go. Maybe we can talk about that a little more. It's obviously not getting over it and not being sad anymore, but there's a catharsis there. And once everyone reached out, she was able to let go, but it wasn't just letting go, it was giving him to the world. Hamlet, the greatest play ever written. For 500 years, we've been enjoying it. For 500 years more, we will enjoy it. So she could let him go, and he was able to turn and enter the void, permanent death for him as an individual. But his legacy, his idea, his everything was gone.
And he smiled at her before.
And she smiled too, with her little complete smile. So they were using symbolism there, trying to get into the psyche a little bit, so I guess that's a good...
And acceptance. There was, as you were saying, there's an acceptance. It's not like I'm accepting that you're gone and I'm never going to see you, but it's an acceptance that this has happened. And that is the difference between sort of grief that gets stuck in complicated, when there is no, I cannot accept this loss. I cannot accept that he's gone. And at that moment, you just see that release, that she's able to, again, release him to the world.
She's not in it by herself.
Right.
At least she has her husband. So most likely, we don't know, but most likely in this movie's world, it looks like they're going to make it together as a couple. Not all couples do. So, but they saw each other, they understood each other, and they can now journey together before they were sort of on their own track.
Right, and the whole audience has joined them with that acceptance and participation.
And you could bring the plague back into it. Like everyone at that time was experiencing the death, and everyone needed that catharsis in England at that time.
Any comments about breaking the fourth wall?
Oh, good point.
Reading upon,
Did you notice there was 2 times the fourth wall broke? Did you?
I don't know, the first one, that was obvious.
Which one?
But the end.
Oh, okay. Well, they did, right, but actually, Hamnet looked directly at the camera when he came down to switch places with Judith. There was a CCTV shot again, and he turned and he looked and said, "Get away." And what did I say that the camera is in this movie? The camera is death. So he was saying, look away, don't look that I'm switching places. So there's another scene, that early scene of the twins when they were switching genders to trick. That was, foreshadowing of taking place later. But he did it twice in that scene. He actually turned it. You can't see it clearly, maybe here, but if you watch it again on like a full HD TV that's a little closer, it's very awkward too when you see that happen in a movie like this. Like, why did you just look at me? Like I'm just sitting here. Any final thoughts? There's probably still a million things to say, but I know it's getting late. And I would say she was amazing in this film. And that's the general critical consensus. She's a powerhouse in this. And she just learned that a lot of it was improvised. It was take the script, study it, bring what you want to it. And he was good, but I think she just overpowered him. He's sort of an afterthought. But my favorite scene was when it was just a close-up of him listening to the actors rehearse the Get to the Nunnery again, and then he gives like a stunning interpretation of that little monologue, and it was just like, whoa. And again, it's like no one can do what he just did, but he comes from a theater background. He probably had 5 to 8 years of just doing theater before TV and film sort of found him. So I think that was palpable in this movie. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Megan. And we'll see what happens next year.